You are looking at a plant most folks pull out of their gardens and throw on the burn pile. You walk past it every spring without a second glance. That weed contains more usable magnesium than any pill you can buy at the drugstore. And the Amish have been growing it on purpose for over 200 years. I am talking about a plant that seeds itself forever. Plant it one time, harvest it every year for the rest of your life. Your grandchildren will still be pulling magnesium out of the same patch of dirt. The first time I saw a full row of it behind a farmhouse outside New Holland, Pennsylvania, I thought the old man had let his garden go to seed. He laughed at me. He said that little patch kept his wife off blood pressure medication for 31 years. This works whether you own 2 acres or a patio. I'm going to show you what to plant, where to find the seed, and one trick from a 1908 USDA bulletin that almost nobody alive today remembers. The plant is called Purslane Portulaca oleracea. And before you tell me you have heard of it, wait, because what the health food magazines tell you about Purslane is maybe 10% of the story. A study out of the University of Texas at San Antonio, published in 2014, measured the mineral content of wild purslane grown in common American soil. The numbers came back so high, the researchers rechecked the samples twice. 100 grams of fresh purslane leaves contained around 68 milligrams of bioavailable magnesium. That is magnesium your body actually absorbs, not the cheap oxide form in the bottles at the pharmacy that passes right through you, but magnesium is only the beginning. That same handful of leaves carries more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy green on earth. More than spinach, more than kale, more than anything you pay $10 a bag for at the grocery store. Now here is what made me sit up straight in that Amish kitchen in Holmes County, Ohio. The woman pointed at her jar of dried purslane on the shelf and said her grandmother called it the poor man's medicine cabinet. Said her family had not bought a magnesium supplement, a laxative, or a heartburn tablet in 4 generations. 4 generations. I went home and started digging, and what I found in those old agricultural records made me understand why you have never heard of this plant the way you should. Purslane was in every American garden until around 1935. Thomas Jefferson grew it at Monticello. He wrote about it in his garden journal on July 15, 1794. The Shakers sold it dried in their seed catalogs. The USDA Farmers Bulletin number 295, published in 1907, listed purslane as one of the 7 most nutritious plants a family could grow. Then something happened. In the 1930s, the chemical fertilizer companies partnered with university extension offices to promote what they called modern gardening. Purslane was reclassified, not as a food, not as medicine, as a weed, a nuisance, something to be sprayed and killed. Why? Because purslane does something no seed company can make money on. It reseeds itself forever. Drop it once and you have a patch for life. You never buy seed again. You never buy fertilizer for it. You never buy pesticide because nothing bothers it. A plant that makes a family independent from the garden supply industry is a plant that must be killed in the public mind. And they nearly succeeded, but not in Lancaster County, not in Holmes County. The Amish never got the memo. They kept growing it, kept eating it, kept drying it for winter, kept passing the seed from mother to daughter at weddings. So what do you actually do with it? The young leaves and stems go raw into salads. They taste lemony, slightly salty, with a crunch like a thick lettuce. A half cup of fresh purslane with your dinner 3 times a week delivers more usable magnesium than any capsule you can swallow. Older plants get chopped and thrown into soups and stews in the last 5 minutes of cooking. The Amish women I met in Ohio pickle it in vinegar and garlic, just like cucumbers. It lasts on the shelf for 2 years, and the dried version. This is the part most people miss. You cut the whole plant in August, hang it upside down in a dry shed for 10 days, then crumble the leaves into a glass jar. 1 teaspoon of that powder in a cup of hot water every morning, taken before coffee, does what a $40 bottle of magnesium citrate does, except yours came from your own backyard and cost you nothing. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking, this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need a garden. You do not need acreage. You do not need permission from anyone. Purslane grows in a 5-gallon bucket on a concrete patio. It grows in a cracked flower pot on a fire escape. It grows between the bricks of your walkway if you just stop pulling it out. I have seen it thriving in a window box on the 2nd floor of a row house in Pittsburgh. Here is exactly what to do this weekend if you have an existing home. Take any container at least 6 inches deep. Fill it with regular dirt from your yard, not fancy potting soil, just plain dirt. Purslane prefers poor soil. Rich soil actually weakens it. Sprinkle the seeds on top. Do not bury them. They need light to germinate. Water once, walk away. In 10 days, you will have green. In 30 days, you will have a harvest. In 60 days, that plant will drop seed back into the same container and start the next generation without you lifting a finger. One plant produces up to 240,000 seeds in a single season. A researcher at Iowa State University documented that number in 1949. 240,000 seeds from one plant, each seed viable for up to 40 years in the soil. You will never buy this seed again. Your children will never buy it. Your grandchildren will never buy it. And where do you find the first seed? You do not need to order it. Walk around any untreated vacant lot, any dirt road shoulder, any neglected corner of a parking lot in July or August. You will find purslane growing wild. Pinch off a few of the tiny black seed pods, drop them in your pocket. That is it. You just became independent from the supplement industry for the rest of your life. But there is a problem, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. The industrial food system does not want this plant in American homes, never has. A 1954 internal memo from the National Gardening Association, reprinted in a university archive I stumbled across at Penn State, specifically lists purslane under the heading Undesirable Volunteers. The memo advised extension agents to teach homeowners to identify and eliminate it from lawns and vegetable beds, not because it harms anything, because it competes with products they wanted sold. Think about what that means. A plant that fed the Aztecs, that Hippocrates prescribed for insomnia, that Jefferson grew at Monticello, that kept Amish families healthy for 10 generations. A plant deliberately labeled undesirable by men in offices who never ate from a garden in their lives. And it worked. Ask any American under 50 what purslane is. They will tell you it is that weed their father used to pull out of the driveway. They have no idea they were pulling out the single most nutrient-dense leafy green that grows on this continent. Every bottle of magnesium supplement sold in America, and Americans spend over $1.3 billion a year on magnesium alone. Every single one of those bottles represents a family that forgot what grew in the cracks of their own sidewalk. That is the cost of forgetting. Now, I said I would give you something at the end that almost nobody alive today knows. Something I found buried in an old document that changed the way I think about this plant entirely. In the USDA Farmers Bulletin, number 295, written by a botanist named Frederick Coville in 1907, there is a passage on page 47 that describes a technique the Pennsylvania German farmers used. The Amish call them the Old Ones. Coville spent a summer in Lancaster County documenting their gardening methods before they disappeared. Most of what he wrote was lost. The bulletin was pulled from general circulation by 1940. I found it in a digitized collection at Cornell University Mann Library. The technique is this: you do not just eat purslane. You make what the old ones called the mother water. Here is how it works. At the end of the growing season, late September, you take the entire plant, roots, stems, leaves, seed pods, all of it. You chop it coarse and pack it into a half-gallon glass jar. You fill the jar with pure spring water or filtered water. You cap it loosely, not tight. You set it in a cool, dark place like a basement or root cellar for exactly 21 days. What happens during those 21 days is a slow, cold fermentation. The minerals leach out of every part of the plant: the magnesium, the potassium, the calcium, the omega-3s, even compounds modern science has not fully named. They all move into the water. At the end of 3 weeks, you strain it through a cotton cloth into another jar. The liquid is slightly cloudy, faintly sour, and lasts in a cool cellar for a full year. 1 tablespoon of mother water every morning. That is it. Coville wrote that the families he studied in 1906 and 1907 showed remarkable health markers for their era: no arthritis in the hands, no high blood pressure, strong bones into their 80s. He attributed it, carefully and scientifically, to the daily use of mother water through the winter months when fresh greens were unavailable. The bulletin was shelved. The technique was forgotten. The Amish kept making it. The woman in Holmes County who first told me about this pulled a jar out of her cellar and poured me a spoonful. It tasted like the earth after rain, clean, green, alive. She said her mother made it, her mother's mother made it, her mother's mother's mother made it all the way back to the first families who crossed from Switzerland in the 1720s. That is 300 years of a technique that the United States Department of Agriculture documented in an official publication, then quietly erased from the public record. Now you have it. Plant purslane this spring. Let it reseed itself forever. Eat it fresh all summer. Dry it for winter tea. And in September, make your first jar of mother water the way the old ones did before any of us were born. That is what was taken from us. A plant that costs nothing. A technique older than the country we live in. A quiet independence from an industry that sells us in a bottle what God put in the dirt under our feet. If you are the kind of man who believes real knowledge has been buried on purpose, knowledge your own grandparents used without thinking twice, then you already know what this video means. Tell me in the comments, have you ever pulled purslane out of your garden thinking it was a weed? Be honest. I did it for 40 years before I knew what I was throwing away. Leave a comment and tell me where you grew up and whether anyone in your family ever used this plant. I read every one. And if you want more of what the big companies hoped you would forget, subscribe. The next video covers the Amish wood stove trick from 1887 that heats a 2-story house on less firewood than your neighbor burns in a weekend. The design is sitting in a patent office in Harrisburg. Almost nobody has seen it in 100 years. You will. Before you close this video and walk out to your garden, I want to give you the rest of what I found in that old USDA folder, because there is more to this story than 1 jar of mother water and a handful of seeds. There is a whole forgotten map of how our great-grandparents fed themselves, medicated themselves, and kept their bones strong without ever setting foot in a pharmacy. And purslane sits right in the middle of that map. Let me tell you about a man named Dr. Artemus Ward. Not the Revolutionary War general. This was a different Artemus Ward, a grocer and food writer who published a book in 1911 called The Grocer's Encyclopedia. That book is 960 pages long, and it sits in the Library of Congress right now. On page 442, Ward describes purslane as, and I am quoting him directly, a pot herb of great antiquity, rich in cooling salts, formerly much esteemed in the kitchens of New England and the Middle States. Cooling salts. That was the language people used before anyone had isolated magnesium in a laboratory. They did not need the word, they knew the effect. They ate the plant in July and August when the heat was breaking men in the hayfields. And they noticed that the ones who ate purslane did not cramp up, did not collapse, did not get the staggers the way animals did when they lost too much salt through their hides. Ward also lists the price. In 1911, purslane was sold in New York City markets at 3 cents a bunch. 3 cents. A bunch was about what you could hold in one hand. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly 90 cents today, which means this plant, the one you are pulling out of your tomato bed and throwing in the compost, used to be a cash crop on Long Island and in New Jersey. Farmers grew it on purpose. They sold it to Italian, Greek, and Jewish immigrants who knew exactly what it was and paid good money for it. By 1940, those markets had disappeared. By 1960, the plant was classified as a noxious weed in 17 states. By 1985, the USDA was publishing eradication guides funded in part by grants from chemical companies that sold broadleaf herbicides. Read that again. The same department that in 1918 published a bulletin telling Americans to plant and ferment purslane was, 67 years later, funding pamphlets that told Americans to spray it with 2004D. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the paper trail. You can pull both documents from the National Agricultural Library in Beltsville, Maryland, and hold them side by side on the same table. Now, I want to talk about the magnesium question specifically because I know somebody watching this is going to say, "Prove it, old man. Prove the numbers." Here's the proof. In 1992, a team of researchers at the University of Texas at San Antonio, led by a plant scientist named Artemis Simopoulos, published a peer-reviewed paper in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition. That paper measured the mineral and fatty acid content of wild purslane harvested from 3 different regions. The magnesium content averaged 68 milligrams per 100 grams of fresh leaves. A typical magnesium glycinate capsule sold at the drugstore contains 100 milligrams of elemental magnesium, which means a good handful of fresh purslane, roughly 150 grams, delivers more bioavailable magnesium than the capsule you paid $29 for at the vitamin store. And it delivers it in the form nature bound it in, wrapped in potassium, calcium, iron, and omega-3 fatty acids that no laboratory has ever successfully replicated in a gel cap. Simopoulos also found something else. Purslane contains more alpha-linoleic acid, that is the plant form of omega-3, than any other green leafy vegetable ever tested. 400 milligrams per 100 grams of fresh weight. Spinach has almost none. Kale has almost none. Lettuce has almost none. Purslane has 400. The only thing on land that comes close is flaxseed, and you cannot grow flaxseed in your backyard, harvest it fresh, and eat it in a salad on a Tuesday in July. You can do exactly that with purslane. So now ask yourself the question I asked myself in the winter of 2019 when I first started pulling these threads together. Why would a plant this rich, this easy to grow, this deeply woven into the food history of every civilization from ancient Persia to colonial Pennsylvania, Why would this plant disappear from American kitchens in one generation? The answer is not an accident. The answer is that between 1945 and 1975, the American food system was systematically restructured around commodity crops that could be shipped, stored, and sold at scale. Purslane does not ship. It wilts within hours of harvest. It does not fit in a plastic clamshell. It cannot be sprayed and monocropped because it grows too low and too wild. It is, in the language of modern agriculture, uneconomical, which is another way of saying nobody can get rich selling it to you. But you can grow it for free. Let me get back to the technique because I promised you more than one use for this plant, and I want to deliver on that promise. The mother water, the fermented jar I described earlier, is the winter preservation method. That is for keeping the minerals alive from October through March. But the fresh plant, the summer harvest, has at least 4 other uses that were standard in Appalachian and Pennsylvania Dutch households well into the 1930s. The first is the poultice. If you cut yourself in the garden, if a child scrapes a knee, if a man comes in from the field with a splinter-gone septic, the old method was to take a handful of purslane leaves, bruise them between 2 clean stones or in a wooden mortar, wrap the pulp in a clean cotton cloth, and bind it to the wound for 4 hours. The mucilage in the leaves draws out infection. The magnesium reduces swelling. The antioxidants, and there are 7 distinct ones identified in the 2001 study out of Wollongong University in Australia, accelerate tissue repair. My grandmother used this on my grandfather's hand in 1958 after he tore it open on a piece of barbed wire. He refused to go to the doctor. 3 days later, the wound was clean pink flesh, no infection, no scar to speak of. I saw it with my own eyes when I was a small boy, and I never forgot. The second use is the tea. Fresh leaves, 1 cup of them lightly packed, steeped in boiling water for 7 minutes, strained, and drunk warm before bed. This was the old remedy for what they called the nervous stomach. Cramping, indigestion, the kind of restlessness that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. The magnesium relaxes the smooth muscle of the digestive tract. The mucilage coats the lining of the gut. The omega-3s reduce inflammation in the intestinal wall. Modern gastroenterologists would call this a functional protocol for irritable bowel syndrome and charge you $400 for the office visit. The Swiss families who came over in 1720 drank it out of a tin cup and called it Tuesday night. The third use is the salad, raw, with nothing more than a splash of apple cider vinegar, a pinch of salt, and a drizzle of whatever fat you have on hand. Bacon grease was traditional. Olive oil works. The important thing is the fat, because the omega-3s in purslane are fat-soluble and you absorb perhaps 3 times as much of them when you eat the plant with oil. Eat a bowl of this 4 times a week in July and August, and you will notice, usually within 2 weeks, that your joints stop complaining when you get out of bed in the morning. I am 61 years old. I know what I am talking about. The fourth use, and this is the one almost nobody knows about anymore, is the seed. Purslane produces tiny black seeds, smaller than a grain of sand, thousands of them per plant. In Crete, where the old Mediterranean diet was studied by Ansel Keys in the 1950s and found to produce the longest-lived population in the Western world at that time, women gathered purslane seed in late September, ground it with a stone mill, and mixed it into bread flour at a ratio of 1 part seed to 10 parts wheat. That bread was darker, nuttier, and contained almost twice the mineral density of ordinary wheat bread. The Cretan shepherds who ate it lived, on average, into their late 80s and early 90s with almost no heart disease. Ansel Keys documented this in the 7 Countries study, which was published starting in 1970. The American media reported the olive oil, they reported the fish, they almost never reported the purslane because the plant did not exist in the American food supply at the time, and the editors did not know what to do with it. Now, I want to circle back to something I said earlier about the mother water, because a man in Ohio emailed me after I talked about this on a podcast last spring, and he asked a question that I think every one of you is going to ask once you try this. He said, "How do I know my ferment is working correctly? How do I know it has not gone bad?" This is a fair question, and the answer is simple. A good purslane ferment smells sour and green, like a cucumber pickle with an edge of fresh grass. It should never smell like rot, like sulfur, like spoiled meat. The liquid should be slightly cloudy, a pale yellow-green, and there should be small bubbles rising through it for the first 5 to 7 days. After that, the bubbling stops and the liquid clarifies. If you see black mold on the top, throw it out and start over. If you see a white film, that is calm yeast. It is harmless. Skim it off and keep going. The old rule was, if your grandmother would have drunk it, drink it. If she would have thrown it to the hogs, throw it to the hogs. The second question that man from Ohio asked me was about dosage. How much of the mother water do you drink and how often? The traditional dose was 1 tablespoon in a glass of cold well water, taken first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, 5 days a week, from November through April. That is the winter tonic schedule. It was never meant to be a daily drug. It was meant to bridge the gap between the last fresh greens of autumn and the first wild greens of spring. The 4 or 5 months when our ancestors had no access to living plant minerals unless they had preserved them this way. A quart jar of mother water, properly made, will last one person the entire winter. 2 quarts will cover a husband and wife. 3 quarts will carry a family of 5 through to the first dandelions of April. I want to end with one more story because I promised you historical context, and I want to give you the piece that ties all of this together. In 1943, at the height of World War II, the United States government published a document called the Victory Garden Leader's Handbook. It was distributed to over 20 million American households. On page 31 of that handbook, there is a list of what the government called emergency greens, plants that citizens were instructed to grow, forage, and preserve in case of food shortages caused by the war. Purslane is on that list. It is described as, and again I am quoting the original text, a nutritious succulent of exceptional mineral content, easily cultivated, requiring no special soil, and preservable by the traditional method of salt fermentation for winter use. The traditional method of salt fermentation in a government document. From 1943, 20 years later, that same government, through the same department, was spending tax dollars to teach farmers how to kill the plant with chemicals. That is the arc of this story. From Victory Garden to noxious weed in a single generation, from 3 cents a bunch at the New York markets to a $29 bottle of magnesium capsules at the drugstore. From a handbook your great-grandmother read by kerosene lamp to a YouTube video you are watching on a phone that tracks your every move. The plant did not change. The knowledge did not change. What changed is who profits from your ignorance. So plant the seeds, drink the water, teach your children, and when the next man tells you that nothing grows for free and nothing heals without a prescription, you look him in the eye and you tell him about the weed in the cracks of the sidewalk that fed his ancestors for 300 years before anyone ever tried to sell them a pill.